exceptions handling will text IO. So the motivation for the first part, the exception, what's the exceptions mean and why we need it, is because sometimes when you run programs, you get a runtime error. And the program terminates directly if you have this problem. So you need to handle any problem such as a runtime error and so on before it's already happened. And that's why we will study exceptions, okay? But before exceptions, we will start with text IO, which is going to cover input-output streaming, text input, writing on text, and reading from text as well. Okay. So in this meeting, as I said, we will cover input-output, which is for short called IO. So usually to communicate using the IO, there is two ways, either using it communicating with a sequence source or destination. For example, if we're having a file or from a keyboard, another computer, if you're having such, for example, a network or so on. In this way, the source or data is going to come from communicating. Sometimes, which is we're going to deal with this later, if it's coming from graphical user interface, like you having input box and you put some data, and then we will consider the user input as input information, and then we will do some processing and show results at the end. So what we will deal with, this is first one. Error handling. We will show how to deal with the error condition in Java program by a meaning of exception or otherwise. So exception handling, like if you're having a problem, you're having an issue inside your programs, you need to deal with it. Or sometimes if you predict, you think this statement may cause an issue, you need to do some exceptions to make sure this is not really happen. It's not really going to happen and stop your program. But let's back to the input-output streaming. So for Java, it relies on the streaming input-output facilities. What do you mean about streaming? When we say streaming, it's sequence of bytes representing a flow of data from source to destination. So عندنا مجموعة من البايتس, it's going to come one after each other, which is going to represent data. You're going to send certain data, either it's coming from example from a keyboard, so you're writing characters, numbers, whatever, or sometimes it's coming from a file. It can come from many other sources, but for now we will focus on when it's come from a keyboard, which is we already did before. Can anyone remind me if we would like to get some data from a keyboard, which is going to come from a user, which class we get to use? Okay, thank you. Yes, the scanner. So if we would like to get data from a user, we get to use the scanner. And today we will see if you would like to get it from a file or store it on a file, what you're going to do, or which class you're going to use, okay? Okay, so then usually if you would like to do any read or write, there's three main steps to do. The first one is open the stream to define certain objects here. Open the stream, either a read stream or a write, if you would like to read it. Or sometimes if you would like to write something, in both ways, you need to define some object. We will see what you mean about objects or what's the type of the object, the type of class we're going to use, okay? The second step, keep reading from or write file as long as there are need to be used, okay, on the methods. So we're going to read or write from it. And finally, you need to close this stream. Don't worry, if you don't get it yet, we will see it soon on the examples. Streams, input or output, it's going to reading or writing classes that we're going to use. Usually all of them is going to store at java.io package. However, we have one class which is we use it to read. It's not under java.io. Which class? The one that you use it since 105. Which class? The one that you just said it, guys. Which class? Class. I'm not talking about your package. So which class, and it's stored in which package? Which class we use it for reading stream, but it's not under java.io. The class you just said it, that if you would like to read from user, what are you going to use? Which class? Yes, if we'd like to get the data from user scanner. Thank you, guys. Okay, the scanner class, it is under java.io package. The scanner, it's under java.io package. No. So then it's under which package? Utilities. Thank you. Okay, so I'll show you a picture that it may make it little clear, more clear for some people. So if you're having a source, the sources could be files, could be consoles if you're reading from a user. And this is going to create some input stream. This is going to happen as a read. Okay? Usually read is going to happen through using the class, the scanner. Okay? The class the scanner, we're going to create an object from class the scanner to do some reading. Okay? Then this is going to happen inside the Java application. Later, if you would like to do some output stream, which is a write, you need to know what is your destination. So for example, if your destination is console, for example, if you would like just to print on the screen, what are you going to use? Are we going to use any special class? Or if you just would like to show your name, for example, on the screen, what are you going to write? Or what are you going to use? If you just would like to print your name on the screen, yes, print line. Okay, so you use system.out print m. Okay, so to print it out. However, if you would like to add or to write inside the file, you have to use a class called file and create an object from that type, from the file type. Later, this is just going to deal with using a file, but later if you would like to write on that file, use a class called print writer and create object from that type. Okay, we'll see it in details soon. Okay, so this you are already familiar with the part inside the try. The scanner, you already know that one. We defined a scanner object. What is the name? SC. And then we call it a new scanner and we use it. Okay, so what do we have inside the between brackets? what do we have inside the bracket as an argument? What are we going to send here? What we would like this object, a C object, what is going to read? What is going to deal with? It is going to deal with something's going to come from system.n, which is mean it is some data coming from the console. The user going to write it down. Okay. So here we defined the scanner object to take an input from what? From a keyboard, and we use system N. This is the first step. What's the second step? Use the scanner object. Now you already just define it. To use it, we will use this, the second sentence here. We defined a string called S, and then we said sc dot next line, and you already know that one. Next line is going to bring next the line, right? And then if you would like, for example, to read an integer, what are we going to use? If we would like to read from the user an integer, what are we going to use? Next end, right? Next end. So then you can print the string that you're doing it. And third steps, and many students unfortunately forget this steps, is close stream. So how we can close it? We put the name of the object is c.close. So first define, use, close, define, use, close. And there is an addition step. We can call it step 0, for example, and we always need to have it, otherwise the program is not going to work. Calling necessary packages, library. So we call it utilities because a util is include the scanner class. Okay, so one may wondering why we having this try and catch here, and what does this mean? This is the second part of today's lecture, but just let me give a brief information about what it is. So try mean, check those methods here. If it has any issue or what is called exceptions, then catch. Show this method. It is going to create an object called E with a type file not found exceptions, and is going to print this statement is going to have information about the exceptions happened. So for example, if you tried to open a file, in this case is not a file, but let's assume if we are opening a file and you cannot open it, so we're using file not found exceptions here. Okay. Okay, so now we will move to the new part that we didn't work on it before, a file. So the scanner, we know it. We know that we use the scanner for reading. For reading what we usually used before, it's for reading from the keyboard, from a user. But now we will use the scanner to read from a file. But before we use the scanner to read from a file, we need to define an object from a file type. Okay? Do you remember the last picture I showed to you? I told you if the destination is from type of file, you need to create an object from type file. So a data type for fr is file. So if fr is an object from type file, and to create this instance, we call the constructor by sending the path of the file that we would like to use, either to read from it or write to it. Okay, so the first step here is divided to two parts. The first step is have 101, which is creating a file object that points to your text file. So you have a text file. How we know which file you're going to work on it? You're going to read or write from it. You have this object, which is an FR, is going to point to this file, the location of this file. Then later we need to define the scanner object. So the file object, which is FR, what's the purpose of it? To point where you're going to work, from where you're going to read, from where you're going to write. But the scanner task is to read specific things. So here's not going to read from system N, it's going to read from FR, from this object, which is point to this file. Okay? Later we're going to use, how we're going to read from this file, we're going to create a new variable called S with a type string, and how we can get the first line on text, test.text, the first line. We call the scanner here. We don't call it FR. We call the scanner and ask the scanner, please scanner, go to that file and read the next line, which is here, the first line in the text. And then print it out. And finally, you need to close it out. So to use the scanner, we call utility, and to use the file, we use a package java.io, input output. Okay. This is a reminder for you guys about the scanner methods. The scanner is an important class that we already used before, and we're going to use it today, but we used to use it to read from a keyboard. Now we will deal with the file. So let's assume if you have a file and you just need to read like word by word, which is called token. Whenever there is a space, you need to retrieve the information one by one as a token. So in this case, you get it to use scan.next. Okay, so let me assume, guys, I have this is as a file. Okay, this part here, this is inside a file called test. And I create a scanner which is going to read this file. If I said sc.next, what I'm going to get at the first time? This is the file. What I'm going to get? You are right, true. So the first time if I use text inside this file, I'm going to get true. Next time I'm going to get F. Next time I'm going to get another. Right? Okay. So now let's assume I have this file, but I'm going to use next line. What I'm going to get? You don't need to write the whole line. The first three words is fine. Yes, the first line. So I'm going to get the first line here. Okay. What if I said I would like to get sc.next end, the one here, and I'm using this file? What I'm going to get? Don't think about us. We haven't talked about this. We are in this part on top. Yes, we are not going to get nothing because there is no integer in this file. If I use next double, I'm assuming the one is just a sentence. I'm assuming this is the file. Okay. So let's back to the same example. But now this is our file. Okay. The one return. This is our file. So this is file has those words on the top. If I say has next, what does that mean? If I say this is the file and I create a scanner which is pointing to this using that file, if I said has next, what I'm going to get? Yes, it is Boolean. So what has next do? It's going to return true or false. And it's mean that it's going to take a look to this file and say, is this file has next? So it is has next? Yes. For example, I use this one. I'll keep using. At the end, if I am in this word and I'm done, does it have any next? No. In this way, I'm going to go from the beginning, one word by word, 1, 2, 3, 4, one word by word, until the end. When I reach the end of the file, I'm going to get false for has next. So this can help us, for example, return word by word if we would like to do counting or any other process. This is going to help us dealing with words. So what about has next line? I'm going to read the first line. Does it have next line? True. I'm going to read the next line. Does it has next line? True. I'm going to read the third one. Does it has a next line? True. I'm going to read the last one. Does it has next line? False. So I'm going to stop here. Okay? Has next integer in our example. What is the result of has next int? It is going to be false from the beginning because we don't have any integer here, right? What is the output of has next double from the beginning? Yes, it's going to be false because we don't have any double inside this file. Good job, guys. Okay, so now you are ready to move to learn a new concept about how we can write into a file. We already discovered how we can read from a file. What we used a scanner, which is the same thing what we used before to read from a keyboard. But now to write into a file is different. Before, to just show your name on the console, you put system.out.println and then you show it. But now to write inside the file, you need to use a special class called print writer. And this print writer coming from which package? It's under which package? Print writer. You have the answer on the top of the slide. Exactly. Thank you, guys. So here, the IO, the file, the print writer, all of those class is already coming from the IO package. The only one coming from the utility is the scanner. Okay? So to read into a file, we need to do two things as a first step. Create a file object. So we know which file we are dealing with. We send the path of our file, and we need to create an object from type print writer. Our object's name is BR, okay? And that object gonna to get a file object as an argument inside the print writer constructor. Okay. Okay, the second part is how we can use it. Okay, we defined the print writer then how we can use it, how we can write inside the file. So we put the name of the object that print n. So you know before to print on the screen we use system.out print n. Now we need to print in the file, so we put the name of the print writer that print in, and then we put the sentence we would like to print. We put the second sentence, and we always need to remember to close any streaming we open. If we open the scanner, we close the scanner. If we open the print writer, we close the print writer after we finish. So let's assume if you're having, this is the second part as I said, but just to practice it and make it easy to understand later. Let's assume you try to open a file and you don't have, now you would like to write in this file. And you put file name or the direction is not exist. Okay, so this is going to cause a problem if the direction is wrong. If you don't put a try and catch, this is going to stop your whole program. So what you said here, you tell the program, if you find any issue in this line, come here, create an object with a type exceptions called E, and then print the sentence. Okay? And they give you a very important notes here. They tell you if you have anything, so let's assume you already having test.txt file before, and you have some word on it or some sentence. Here, when you said print n, it's not going to write at the end of the file. No, it is going to erase and write. So it's going to erase what you already had before on inside your file. Okay. So let's see the exercise. If I would like to write a Java code to write those following lines, which is 4 lines, inside the file called luck.txt. How we can do this? You remember I said you need to do 3 steps. Defined, use, close. Defined, used, close. We would like to write inside a file. So that's mean the first step is going to have 2 end steps. We need to create an object from type file, and we need to define an object with a print writer class, so we can write in this text. We're gonna choose it, and then we're gonna to close the print write. Okay, so let's see this one, and we'll back to the second part. So instead of just putting a name of a file here, it is a good practice to put a name by itself. So they defined a string with a name, and then we create an object called fw, and we send the path of the file. Okay, so if I ask you guys, the file is the class, right? And this is the type of the data now here, okay, which is coming from file class. And here's the constructor. The file constructor take one argument with which type, with a type of what? What's the type of the file constructor argument? The constructor حق الفايل it's take only one argument with which type. Yes, string. You're right, guys. You see here, it is string, right? So then here you just point to the file. There's no predictable error gonna to happen here. We just gonna to point to the file. The place where we may get a problem is when we create a print writer object and we try to open that file. That's why we put this inside the try, okay? So we create an object called fr with a type print writer. And then we call a constructor print writer and we send an object, a file object. Now to print this out, what we get to do, we use the name of the print writer object, pr, that print n. We put the first sentence, the second sentence, third, and fourth. So this is going to be written inside the file as the first line, the second line, third, and fourth. And then we need to close the print writer. Okay. If there's anything happen here, if these files cannot be opened for any reason, then the compiler will go right away to the catch, create an object E, and print an error. Okay. So the second part, what they asked us for, write a code to print the content. So we already in the first part, we write inside the file. Now we need to print what we already have inside the file. Okay. So this is the second part. So we having a path name, which is going to string. We're going to create an object called fr. And then to read what we need to use, we need to use an object with a type scanner. To write, we use an object with print write. And here we use an object with a type scanner. They didn't ask us only to read from a file. They asked us also to count how many lines we have. So we're creating string S just to store the line by line. And we create a counter, and always remember, if you're doing a counter, average, sum, always remember to initialize it, okay? So we initialize it with 0. So we need to go inside the file and read it one by one. How we can do this? So read from is the object here on the top, right? So read from is the object, which is going to point into the fr, which has a file name. You remember in 3-4 slides before, I told you like, has next line what's going to return? Boolean, true or false. So as long as this sentence means, as long as the file has next line, which is still have more lines, get inside and do those 2 statements. So how many lines we have? 4. So at the beginning, it's going to get in and store inside the S the next line, which is the first line, and in the same time we're going to increment the counter and print the first line. It's going to get out. It is going to check. Has next line, which is we had 4 lines, right? So yes, we have another line. So you get it to read the next line, increment the counter, and print out string. After we finish this is going to repeat how many times, guys? So at the end of this, the counter is going to be how much? What's the amount of the counter at this, after this one, after this loop? Why 4? Why 4? Yes, because we have 4 lines. You're good, guys. Okay, so after you finish this, we need to close it. Close what? We close the scanner object, which is the read from. And then we're going to print a number of line, which is 4 here. If there is any issue opening the file, we're going to throw exceptions here and it's going to go to catch. Okay. A reading and a writing object. So sometimes you would like to write inside an object from a file or write into an object from a file. Either to write the status, or you can use it for data to store in a file inside an object. Okay. For example, you need to access each attribute for reading or writing using get or set. You remember, if we have a class and we having a private variable, how we can access those variables? Through using a getter and a setter. Okay. In order to bring and print the content, for example, inside an array of circles, you remember this is before, or rectangle or whatever, if you're having an array list of objects, you need to use each and access an attribute using a getter methods. Why they saying this? Because we're going to use it now and the next exercise. Don't worry if you don't get it by words or if you don't remember it, we will explain it in details in the next exercise, okay? So this is the exercise. So they ask us to create class called deal rectangles, okay? Which has 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 methods, okay? And they tell you, and this is very important here, to write a static method. Static, static, static. Okay. Static method fill rectangles, which is going to take a list. So the arguments will be a list of what? Of object as an argument and fill it with a rectangle object. So you're going to get a list as an argument, and what's the task for this method is fill it with a rectangle object. Rectangle is a data type coming from rectangle class that we already created before, if you remember, guys. So we having now deal rectangle class, and we have a rectangle class. The second method is static Java methods also. It is write to file. What is the job of this file? Is to write a list of rectangles into text file, and they give you the name of the file. So the list you're going to create it, you're going to store it inside this file. The third method is read from a file. So now we will do the opposite. If you already having a file, you need to read from this file and return the content as a list. So either in the first one you have a list and you write it to the file, and in the second one you have the information inside the file and you would like to return it or return the contents as a list. Okay. They have a method print area, which is, we already know this one before. We discussed it with a circle, a rectangle. So which is take the list. So what's the argument is going to take a list returned from a read from file, which is the third method here, this one, and print area of each rectangle on the list. So if the list has a 3 rectangle, we will print 3 area. And the last things, they ask us to create a main methods to involve those method. So this is going to be include another class. So here we will start. I'm not going to start in order. I'm going to start with the main method. So this is the main methods here. Okay. So we create array list with a type rectangle. How many lists we going to have? List and list 1. And then this is just created. We haven't initialized it. Okay. And then we gonna to create an array. Here we just define a pointer. Then we gonna to create an array list for a list, not list 1 yet, only list. We will call the create method. They didn't explain this on the exercise, but we will do, don't worry. Okay. This is a method inside deal rectangle. It is going to get a list to create the array list. And then we have write to file to write the information that is already inside the list inside the file. Okay, so we will back to this parts later. So let's take more look in this one. Okay. So we will have a deal rectangle, and this is the methods inside it. A fill rectangle, a write to rectangle, a read from the file, and a print cell area and create. And then a rectangle, this is, they didn't explain it because they assumed you already remembered it from the previous meeting. The only one important things they already mentioned inside the slide, in the last line, if you remember, they said the rectangle constructor is going to have 3 arguments, which is the width, the height, and the color. And we're going to create a new array list and list 1 with type, which is going to have a rectangle object inside it. So this is the code that I just showed to you from the meeting slide. I'll just go trace the code one by one with you guys, and you can ask me if you have any question during that time. Okay. So first, when we say array list, rectangle list, and list 1, that means you just create a pointer. But for now, during this time, it's like it's pointing to what? A list and a list 1 is pointing to what here? In this step. Let's assume I didn't complete doing anything. You're right, it's going to point to null. Okay, at this stage is pointing to null. What is going to point to something when you use the new? So here in the second line, when we said list equal to new array list with a type rectangle, yes, when we use a new operation, we're going to create an array. Now we're having an array. But again, if I'm looking for this part, for the value inside the index one, what I have here? What do I have inside here? It is a pointer, and it's point to what? It's gonna to be pointer. It doesn't gonna to include the primitive value. It's gonna to be pointer, and it's gonna to point to null again. Okay, so we haven't reached the need point yet. So first we just declare list. Second, we just create a list with the places. Okay, now we need to create, or let this location point to the appropriate object. So how we going to do this? In a third line, we call it deal underscore rectangle, which is the name of the class, dot create, and we send the list. A list until this time was empty. We hadn't had the gray box yet. At this time, when we are in this part, we just have a pink and a purple part. Okay? And whenever we create, call or invoke the create, let's see what the create do. The create is a static method. Okay? And it's going to get and a list with a type array list rectangle. What is gonna to do? It is gonna to create object called R1 with a data type what? Rectangle. We have a rectangle here. It's already full implemented before. Okay, so we create the first object and we say a new rectangle, and with this information, the width, the height, and the color. The same thing with an R2 and an R3. Okay. Until this point, we didn't have this row. When those rows are created, after the add sentence here. So the rows are created after the add sentence. Here you just create an object and they flow by themselves. No one pointing to them. No one can reach them. You don't know where they are. That's, you can access them. You know them, but I mean, no one is pointing to them so far. Okay? So here you attach them, attach those objects with the array. Okay? So this is going to take what I just explained already, some stuff that we explained it before. This is what we're going to do new for us now. Okay, guys? Okay, so we have the list. The list already filled. We have 3 objects inside it. So the compiler, after finish the first line, second line, third line, this is what the compiler see. It's going to go to the 4th line. Now it's going to call methods call write to file. Okay? Write to file. And we send the list that we already created before. Okay? Now, it is a static method. It's return nothing, and it's going to get a list. How we can write into file? What first we need to create an object with a type file. So we create the object here. And it is pointing to a rectangle, the text file. It was empty at the beginning. We didn't have those. Okay? This is, we see it soon. Then we're going to create an object BR with a type print writer. So this is the one. With a type print writer from class print writer, we will create an object called BR. And this is going to pointing to object LF. Now we need to go to the file, go to the list, sorry, one by one, get the information and write it in the file, okay? So what are we going to do now? We will use for each loop. Do you remember how for each loop work? It is going to read one by one items. So rectangle, what is rectangle word referred to here? What is rectangle word referred to here? Refer to what? No, it's not class. No, it's not a list. Yes, it's a data type. Thank you. So here, rectangle is a data type. Yes, it's coming from the class. That's okay. But here, when you use it as a data type. So will X with which type? So what's the type of X? It is integer. It is string. It is double. What's the type of the X? Yes, it's object, but more specifically, it's rectangle. Thank you. So here, this sentence, rectangle X mean, create a temporary time called X with a type rectangle. So this is what this sentence means. And then we have the two dots, mean go over a list. So this is a list. Go over a list one by one. Take the first one, the first element on the list, store it inside the X. When you're done with it, move to the second element, move it inside the X. When you're done with it, move the third element until there is no more element inside the list. Okay? So at the beginning, we go to list and we find the first element, which is the R1, and we will move that all information inside the R1 inside the X. So the width is going to be 3, high is 5, and the color is going to be pink. Okay, so now we're going to go to the BR until the BR print in. It is going to print where? It is going to print inside the file. Why? Because it's known through LF that this is the file that I'm supposing to write on. So inside the file, go to X dot get width. Get width here methods. Coming from which class? Yes, it's already for loop. Lujan, you just asked, it is like for, it's for. But for each, it's just simplified issue. That means you need to go from beginning until the end. Okay, get width methods here. Coming from which class? From a rectangle. You're right, guys, because you know X already from type rectangle, so get width is going to coming from class rectangle. So it is going to get width. How much width is going to be 3? Then we will have space. This is the space here, and it's going to get till height. Where is the height? Is 5. So it's going to go till 5, and then space. This is the space. And to get till color, the color is pink. Why we have it as a double? Because it's already defined. The width and the height, it's already defined inside the rectangle as a double. Okay? Whenever we finish the first line, or actually, whenever we finish the first, we're done with the first object inside the list, we will move to the second one. Whenever we move to the second one, now we will ask ourselves, Does the list has any more element? Yes, it does. So we will get till R2 inside the X as it's free. So then we will have a 6 and a 6 and we have a red. Again, we get it to repeat the same things to write the second line and the third line. Enter, there is no more element inside the list. Okay? If there is an issue, any issue opening a file, it is going to throw catch. It is IO exceptions problem. What does it mean is IO exceptions problem? IO is something related to input output. If you cannot read or write into a file. So if there is anything's happen here, if anything's happen here, we get to throw exceptions. And print there is an error. Okay, we'll see it soon in more details. So far so good. Any question about the first part? No? Okay, so the second part, so if you remember here, the first part, we deal with which list? List or list one? We was working on a list, not a list one. List one haven't been defined yet. If you see here, list, what list? It was pointing to null. And a list one was pointing to null. But then we start working on a list. We create the list, we creating an object, we working on the list, putting the object, reading from it, putting something into it. But the list one is still pointing to null. It has nothing yet. So list one now has nothing. So at the beginning, I supposed to, okay, I already put all the steps together. But at the beginning here, we just have this box. We just have the pink box here. Then we said equal, so list one, we didn't say a new array list as what we did for a list, no. We call method called read from a file. So in this time, we already having the data inside the file and we would like to store it now inside this list. So let's take a look to what's read from a list do. Here it is. A read from a list method is a static method inside a deal rectangle class. It is going to return array list with a type rectangle and it's not going to get any arguments. So it has return, but it's not going to get any argument. Okay? So first we will create an object F with a type file, which is pointing to a rectangle text. Now a rectangle text already has this information. It's already filled from the previous step, right? And we will create a scanner S. So the scanner S will deal with the reading from a file. Okay? And then we create three primitive, two primitive with a type double and one reference string, which is a color. So we have W, H, and a color. So now, what we need to, from where we're going to read? We're going to read from a file. So now we check. If you remember from the example I showed to you before, this is when we say, does it has a next? And the first time it's going to be true. It has a next, which is this line. So if it has a next, a W, it is we're gonna to read the first double. So that's why we use an S, that's next double. Then we need to read the next double to store it at a high, H. After we finish double, what we supposed to have? We have to supposed to have a string. So now we are not going to use the next double. We are using a next. It's not a line, it's not a double, it's not an integer, just a word. So we're using next to store it inside the color. So WH color now has all the information. Now we need to get those information, WH and color, and what we would like to do on it, we need to add it into the list. So what's the type of the list here? What's the list type? What's the type of the list? No, you're missing one more thing. It's not a rectangle. No, it's not an object. I already highlighted there. Do you see it? Let me erase and start over. So what's the type of the list? Now you're talking about the file, F. Yes, F object, the data type of it is file. But I'm now talking about list. What the type of the list? It is an array list with the rectangles, right? Okay. So from where add methods come? Add methods coming from which class? Add method, now we're using list.add. Add method coming from which list? Array list, thank you. So add is one of the methods we already studied before that is coming from array list class. And what argument is going to take? It is going to take an argument with a type rectangle, because the array list of the list is the rectangle. So we're creating a new rectangle and we send a W that we already extracting from a file. We're extracting W, H channel color, and we're creating now back an object. So this is the opposite way. Now we're creating another object, but from a file. In the first step, we're having an object and we write it into a file. Now we have it from a file and we're creating an object and we add it here, one by one. We add the first one and then we complete it again. We extracting W, H channel color, and we adding the second object. We extracting W, H color again, and we adding one more object. Whenever we're done, we close the scanner with rule catch if there is any problem, and then we return the lists. Which list is the list one? Here we gonna to send it to list one. So which one is gonna to be changed? The list one. Okay? And the last, you add them to the list one, Bushra. Okay, I know it's a little confusing. A list here, you add it to list inside this method is called list. Okay? But whenever this is finished, it's gonna to return and the same information is gonna to store inside the list one. Okay? Why the code is list.add? I just explained, Bushra. So a list is the list here, the one you're creating inside the method. So inside the method, it's called list. That's why you're retaining a list. But later, after you finish read from file, it is gonna to back to the main method and store it inside the list one. Okay, it's a little confusing. Yes, here we having another list. This is a list from the main method. We're gonna to have a similar exactly one, but here inside a method. and they having the same name. Okay. Okay, so this is the end of the exercise. Let's back to our main slides. So this is what I just explained. I just explained it on detail. Muhammad, you're okay if you would like to go. Okay. So the only things they explained here in addition, they said if you would like to have a next, you're going to get element by element. If you would like to get a line, it's going to be line. But in our case, we would like to go with element by element, not a line. Okay. Okay. So this is lead us to exceptions. Exceptions is an event which occur during execution of a program that stop the normal flow of the program. So if there is anything inside your program that cause an issue, this is what we call it exceptions. An exception describes an error caused by your program, and this is, I need to emphasize this sentence here. When they said, okay. About your program. So it's not from the system. It's not a problem happened during, it's coming from an application. It is something coming from your program. You make some mistakes that cause this issue, okay? So you can catch and handle this program. الفكرة إن ممكن يكون في البرنامج مشكلة. المشكلة مش ناجمة عن مشكلة في نفس النظام أو نفس البرنامج، مشكلة في البرنامج الكود اللي أنت كاتبينه. هنا هذه ممكن نشتغل عليها إن هي exceptions. راح تحتوي على two concepts اللي هي الكاتش والهاندل. إيش يعني الكاتش والهاندل؟ إن تحاول توجد إيش هي المشكلة في البداية، وبعد كده تقول أنت كيف راح تتعامل معها. In some cases we are not going to handle with it, which is what we're going to see اللي هي اللي through later, okay? Java exception handling, how are we going to handle it? You can use it to deal with a potential serious or unpredictable error. متى راح نستخدم when we get to use the exception? Potential serious or unpredictable. And I need you, again, I need to emphasize this is unpredictable, because if it's something predictable, مثلا, it's like a debugger is going to find it. An exception, what's the debugger going to find that there is an issue there, okay? So something predictable, مثلا, if you're dividing by 0, you know you're going to get an error. It's predictable. You know you cannot divide it by 0. For example, if your array is going from, the size of your array is 5, and you try to access the 10th element from an array, you know you cannot do this. You're going to get an error. It's predictable. You are not sure if it's going to happen or not. Like what we saw in a previous example, if you try to open a file, you're not sure if the file is going to be opened or not, if the file is exist or not exist. So you don't know what's the result of this sentence, okay? The program tried to read, for example, here's some serious example. Okay, when the program tries to read past the end of the file, so you have a file and you're trying to read past of this file. So if this is the end of the file, and you know, for example, the location of it is 2000 or something, and you're trying to access 3000, or you keep doing next and next, which is going to get over the end of the file. you're gonna get problem. Another example is if you cannot find a specific input file. This is what we used in our previous examples here. This is IO exceptions. I believe there is a one. They all of them using exception, although they mention later you're supposed to use a specific one. For example, here, file not found. Here, file not found. So if you cannot find the file, that's mean, okay, this is the second part here. If you cannot find, you throw out file not find. Yes, if you're having a wrong path or you're trying to read from a file which is not exist or so. The third example, try to connect to websites using invalid address. If you put URL but is invalid, if running out of memory, using all the memories available for your programs and you run out of memories. If you're trying to access an array element, which is index is larger than the upper limit. So if it's only 5, you're trying to go over it, and overflow condition occur when the result sum arithmetic operations, such as if you're trying to assign, you're trying to calculate the average, okay? And you have variable 1, variable 2, variable 3. You get a sum, you said V1, V2, V3, V1 plus V2 plus V3 divided by 3, and you tried to store the result inside the value called average, and that average is integer value, then you will get an issue because it's supposed to be double. Okay. So sometimes you're supposed to read from a file or from a user an integer, and then you find that you're having a string, you will get an error. A method sometimes through exceptions, if it's referred to null, like what we saw in the previous. If you're just creating the array or creating the list, and you haven't creating any object, and then you said I'm going to access what I have here, you will get an error said it's referred to null. Okay, so we will get refer null. Let's see this example here. For example, here the exception called input mismatch exception. So now before this lesson, we always said I get an error, but now we get to categorize what we get. So if you're having an issue, you know what's that issue coming from. So for example here, okay, for example here, scanner input, you read something from a user, right? And then you ask the user to enter an ID, a name, an email, and a fee. And you defined an ID as an integer, and you read input dot next end. In this example, they didn't complete the full information to read the name, the email, and fees. So they just read the ID. The user, what did he or she entered? M, letter M. And then we get an exceptions from Java. What it said? Java.utility input mismatch exceptions. That means you're supposed to read integer, but what user entered is a character. Okay? So this is what leads to mismatch exceptions. An exceptions type, and this is what I just said. Before we just know, okay, there is an error, there is an issue. We don't categorize them. We don't have information about it. now we have more information. Exceptions, it has different types. And actually, all of them's get to be under the root of all Java libraries or all Java classes. So what the root of all Java classes? Which class is the root of all Java classes? Java classes and user defined. Which class is the root of all classes? It's an object, yes. It's an object here. An object is the root class for all classes, either built-in or user-defined. Okay. Then we have another class called Drupal. This is going to deal with issues inside Java, and then we will have two main classes, one called exceptions and one called exception and one called error. This part is going to deal with the system error, if there is any system error, and it's rarely happen. So this part is deal with system error. So with Java virtual machine, it is going to call this class an error class if there is any problem inside the system, but this is rarely happen. Okay. However, the other part, the exceptions, this is what we are dealing with today. An exception it's caused by a system or what? By your program. An error is caused by a system. An exceptions caused by the programmer or the developer, okay, from your program, okay, and it has different class. Those are just three of them, which is a class not found exceptions. If the class cannot be found, IO exceptions if you cannot read or write something from a file. A runtime exceptions, it has a child classes which are arithmetic exceptions. So if you're having a problem, you're trying to assign double to integer, would like to dividing by 0, this is all arithmetic exception. Null pointer exceptions, like in our example, you creating a list, but it hasn't referred to anything, so null pointing exceptions. An index out boundaries, so if you're trying to access index 10 and the array having supposed to get a string argument and you send double, so here it's going to throw legal exceptions. Okay. A runtime exception is caused by the programming error, such as the backcasting. So if you're using, again, in our example, if you're having an average and you don't casting a division after you dividing integer, it's get cast out of bounds when you're working with an array or if it's numeric error. Okay, now you will hear a new concept about the exceptions. So an exception has two types. One type called unchecked exception. Ragad, what do you mean about like what's illegal? Illegal, like if you're having a method supposed to get a string and you're sending a double or integer argument into it, okay? So now we will talk about two important concept or types of exceptions. So an exception either unchecked or checked. What does that mean? Unchecked exception, no need to catch or declared. It's mean unchecked by you. It shouldn't be checked from your side. So this doesn't unchecked method is not requiring an additional work from you. Okay? Unchecked exceptions, the exception that need not be catch or declare. Unchecked need not be. ممكن الاسم اللي حقها شويه يخربط البعض. هي معناها الانشكت ان هي مش مشيك عليها، ما تتطلب منك كديفلوبر انك انت تشيك عليها. بينما المثال اللي بعده اللي راح نشوف اللي هو التشيك اكسبشن معناه مطلوب انت you have to check الاكسبشن. So unchecked you don't have to. You don't supposed to do it. بس check exception you're supposed to check it. Okay? So uncheck exception reflecting error programs fail to take an occur. ممكن انك تستخدمها الاشياء اللي هي تكون unchecked. You can solve it by using if statement only. مثلا array index out of boundaries. إذا أنت تعرف inside a loop, if you know that inside a loop is supposed to go from 0 until a length -1. So this is something you can deal with it. You can create if statements. You need to double check the head of a loop to make sure you don't go over or out of the bound. Okay. So out of bound happen when you go outside the array. Arithmetic, when it's going to happen with the legal argument like dividing by an integer. A number format exceptions can cause by allocation, read a number or some sort that doesn't have to appropriate format. So if you're trying to store is going to throw a number of format exceptions. A null point, if happen when application attempts to use a null case where an object is required. For example, invoking a method on a null references, like the method اللي لسه again array اللي عملناه. تمام؟ الchecked exception راح نميز بين الchecked exception والunchecked exceptions. السب-class of throwable أو throwable اللي هي الكلاس إذا تذكروها اللي شفناها هنا هذه لما راح نقسمها it's going to have two categories. Unchecked exception والchecked exceptions. Unchecked exceptions which is included running time exceptions والerror. تمام؟ الcheck exception others. So let me make this a little bigger. So this is the same graph we just saw before, but it's just in a different directions. So we have the throwable, we have an error. So an error exception that should not be catched or declared because we said this is going to come from the system. The exception is going to come from your program, but there is two parts from it. The part الأول, which is going to be a runtime exception, the exception that not need to be catched or declared. Need not be. هذه should not be. ففي الأولى في الايرور أصلاً أنت مو مسموح لك أنك تعمل لها exception لأن هي هذه جاية من اللي تخص الايرور الخاصة بالسيستم. تمام؟ الجزء الثاني اللي هي runtime error لما تجي مشاكل مثلاً بالقسمة على زيرو خارج حدود الاري هذه مش من المفترض that not need to be catched. مش المفترض انك تعمل لها exception يعني ممكن تحلها باستخدام الاف statement المطلوب انك تعمل له exception الاذرز. يعني الان راح نستبعد الايرور shouldn't runtime need not be catched. اللي المفروض تعمل لها هي الرست exception that must be catched or declared. اي شيء خلاف runtime exceptions which is coming from the exceptions class or error class, you supposed to or you must be catched or declared. Okay. Checked exceptions mean that the compiler forces the programmer, as I said, you must deal with these exceptions by using either there's two ways to do it. Try and catch method or throws. The throws it is not going to handle it. The try catch هو اللي راح يمسكها ويوجد ايش البديل او ايش الحل. The throws you just going to figure it out. So ايش امثله على checked exceptions؟ المشاكل اللي لازم تعمل لها exception. ايش مثال لها؟ الامثله لها either for example you go end of file EOF mean end of file. Okay, here EOF end of file exception. You supposed to create it. You must create the EOF exceptions. The file not found. If you cannot find a specific file, زي examples اللي شفناها before, you supposed to create the exceptions. malformed URL معناها malformed يعني إن هي مشوهة، يعني URL مش صحيحة في هذا المثال. So إذا كانت URL it's invalid, then you supposed to throw exceptions as well. So 1, 2, 3 example of the must be creating exception, which is called the checked exceptions. Okay. An exception handling. الآن there's a difference between an exception and exception handling. The exception you find the issue. Then how you get to handle it, how you get to take care of it. So the Java system detects the error. It is a stop in normal flow. So it's how it's going to handle it. It's going to stop. 1. Stop in normal flow. So usually the compiler go line by line. Okay. We say that this code throws an exception. If you find a code that has a throws an exception, you're going to stop. Then a special kind of Java object called exception object is created. So أول خطوة, the first is going to stop, find, throw an exceptions. The second step is going to create an object. You remember في الأمثلة كنا نقول exception ونعمل إيش كان اسم الobject بالأمثلة اللي راحت? If you remember, it was called E. Okay, so you're not going to create this object. It is going to be created whenever there is an issue. So the exception object is going to be created if there is any issue. So it's going to stop, create an object. What is this object is going to hold? The object اللي شفناها قبل شوية. The object, what is going to hold? It's going to hold some information about what has gone wrong. So whenever finding a problem is going to stop, it is going to create an object. That object is going to have the information about what's going to go wrong. The third step, the exception handler catches the exception. So what it's going to do, whereas the controller is transferred from a part of your program where it occurs to an exception handler, which is deal with the situation. So the exception handler, what you're going to do then? If there is an issue, if you cannot open the file, what are you going to do? If the formatting is unright, if the URL is unright, what are you going to do? الexception object is available to the exception handler code and can be used to help deciding the appropriate action. ليش البرنامج أساساً going to create an exception object? Why it's going to create an exception object? لأن information that is going to be inside it is going to help us later to figure out what we're supposed to do, what's the right way to deal with this issue. Okay. For a check exception, you must do one of the two things. The first, declare the method handler. So, which the methods you're going to handle, where you predict that you're going to get an error. In this case, you don't handle the exception within a method, but simply pass it to throughs keyword. We'll see an example soon, okay? Catch the exception. The other things, catch the exceptions. You get the exception and deal with it. النوع الأول أو الطريقة الأولى, you can just throw it. You don't handle it. You don't deal with it. You just declare the method handler, and it's going to deal with it. What we're going to see more in this lecture is the next one, which is the try and catch statement. So you try, you define where is the predictable, if it's going to have a problem, and then you decide the catch. Both of them together called the handling exceptions. Okay. So we will talk first about the declaration and method handler. So this is going to explain the first one here. When declaring an exception in a method handler, use the keyword throughs. So here you create a method called check format. Okay. What is different here, you create this method to say what's the type of the exception you predict is going to happen inside this code. So you have code here. For example, you're opening the file, you're opening URL. So what's the type of exception you predict is going to happen? You throw it here. So you bought it, you throw, inside here, you think you may go end of file exception. In the second example, you think, okay, the method that I'm working on, it couldn't only have one problem. It may have two exceptions. It can get end of the file, or it may have invalid URL. So this is allowed here. So for exception, ممكن انك تسأل, okay, can you only have one exception or you can have more? You can have more. مثل الانترفيس إذا تذكروا, الclasses you can inherit from one. It's not similar, but أساساً أعطيكم كمثال. مثلا الclasses تقدر تنهرت من one class, بس الانترفيس ممكن انك implement from multi. نفس الشيء throughs. You can generate it more than one time. So it's not only one. End of file will malformed URL. Again, طيب, أحيانا you may have more than one problem. لكن all these problems are a subclass of a parent. So مثلا here, you think you may have a problem with opening a file or a file not found. All of those are another problems. End of file. Here, end of file. They give you an example. Actually, I tried to create one. So if you're having an end of file and you have a malformed URL, both of those are a subclass under a parent, which is the IO exception. So the IO exception is the parent of the EOF exception or malformed exception. Okay? So then, instead of saying the EOF exception, malformed URL, you can just use a parent to cover both of them. The other way to use is using the try catch. To deal with the exception that have been thrown, we use the try catch statement. Each try should be followed by at least one catch. So ايش يعني هذا؟ انت ممكن يكون عندك التراي, you can have a try and one catch or maybe sometimes more. Why? Because you may have one statement and you may have multi-statements. Multi-statements mean those statements, each of them, sometimes, not always, could have their own exceptions. So you can say, for example, statement 1 can catch by the first exception, and then the second statement catch by exceptions 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you need to remember the try, you have only one try, which is including multi-statements. Each of those statements can have its own catch. Okay. Here they just give you an advice of good coding. You can, for a catch, if you don't know exactly what's the type of the exception. So for example here, the type of the exception, and it's going to come from this part, file not found. If the scanner try here to go to my file and file cannot find, someone may not figure it out what's the type of exception, so they just said exceptions. As the example we saw it before, it is going to work, it is fine, it is correct, but it's not the appropriate way. If you can define exactly what's the type of the exception, it's much better. Okay. Why we need to handle an exception? The advantage of using the exception handling is to enable a method to throw an exception to the seller without an capability. Method must be handled an exception and terminated the programs. So if you don't do exception, sometimes your program will terminate it directly, and you cannot figure it out what's the problem. Okay. Exception handling is creative error handling code from a normal programming task, making it easy to read. Why we dividing them? مثلا نحن نكتبها try catch نقسمها. It's going to be easy to read. Figure out هذا الجزء اللي حق التراي هو الخاص بالcatch and so on. Okay. Then yes, the exception is a good idea. أحيانا أن to use على أساس أن we avoid terminating the program, but sometimes it's not a good idea because it takes more time and resources. And على أساس أن it is going to create an exception object, is going to save the detail object, then you're going to handle it and so on. If it's necessary, that's why في بعض الحالات لما شفناها قبل شوية أنها هي checked exception, you're supposed to use it. However, if it's some exceptions, they runtime, something you can handle it, you can put if statement and said if dividing by 0 and you solve it, don't use an exception because it's just going to take time and resources. And this is what they said here. So the exception, it is going to take a time and error. If you want exception to process by the caller, you should create an exception object. If you can handle the exception method where occur, if there is a need, it's better انك تستخدم if statements, especially في حالات unchecked exception اللي هي runtime error. Okay. So متى احنا نستخدمها? Where we supposed to use it? We should use the try catch block. You should use it with a check exception. مثل ما قلنا هي الجزء اللي you must to define it and هو enforced you to do it. لا تستخدمها, don't use it to deal with a simple expected situation. إذا شيء إن هي predictable and you can deal with it and you can deal with it, just use the if statement. المثال اللي حاطينه هنا, for example, they're using refer variable to string. الناس تتأكد ان هي هذه الجملة ممكن تكون ان هي through exceptions you get an issue with it. If a refer variable doesn't refer to any string and you call toString method, you're going to get an issue because it's null. But this is not the appropriate way to do it. This is just going to take time and resources. Just use the if statement. Okay? So that's what I just said. Instead of this, say if a refer variable is null, then it's not null. That means it's not referring to null, just print it out. Okay, and this is what's called defensive programming technique to check it out before it's happened. The exception handling typically most slower, so don't use it unless you really need it. The last things in this meeting, it is something called the final clause. So we're going to use the try and we're going to use the catch. The try is going to include the statement that you predict it may have an issue, like opening the file, like what we saw at the beginning of the class. And then a catch is going to handle the issue, print a message or so on. The final, it's a clause that is going to run in any way, either go to try or a catch, either is going to any exception happen or not, is going to run. To deal with the cleaning up, okay? So let's see what they said here. One of the things we often want to do after exceptions must occur is to clean up. How you clean up? Releasing any resources on memory if you don't need it. For example, if you're creating a list, string buffers, string builders, whatever you don't need it, and it's take memories. You can just clean it up. Okay. To deal with this, Java provide another facilities which is called the final clause. Called in the final clause will be executed at the end of try statement, whether or not. Okay. So this is what's important here. Whether or not was interpreted by an exception. In any cases, we're going to go to the final. So we're almost done, guys. I just need your answer here. Okay. So suppose we have a try statement and we have the statements here. Suppose not exception in the statement. So this statement is fine. It has no problem. What's the next line to run? The catch, one, the final, or a next? What is going to run next? If there is no exception in this statement, 1, 2, or 3. Catch, finally, next. Good, guys. Most of you is giving the right answer. Final. Because there is no exception, so we don't need to go to the catch. We're fine. So we go to final. And as we said, in any way, you get to go in final. Either through exception or not. What's next is going to next statement, which is out of the whole catch try block. Okay, now suppose an exception of type, as we said, sometimes you can have a different catch. You can have a catch exception 1, exception 2, exception 3. So let's assume here in a sentence 2, you get an exception type exception 1 is thrown. We're going to go to catch 1, finally 2, or next. Where are we going to go? Where's the compiler will go? 1, 2, 3. Catch, finally, or next? I'm asking what's going to go next, not the whole process. So there's an error here. There's an exception thrown. Where are we going to go? Oh, guys. No, we're not going to go to finally now. We first have to visit the catch. Because there is a thrown statement. We have an exception. There is something wrong here. So first we're supposed to go with catch, then we go to the final. Okay? Yes, we're supposed to go with catch first. And then we will go to the final block because it's always executed. Either there's a problem or not. And after the final, we absolutely get to do a next statement, which is coming after block of try catch. Okay. So this is the end of our meeting. Any question, guys? أي سؤال بخصوص محاضرة اليوم؟ If you would like to leave, you can go, guys. You're welcome, guys. بس حقيقة it's important for me. I know, like, some students is already paying attention of what we're saying. بس للأسف مرة درجات الكويز تزعل كثير. So I don't know where is the problem actually. I don't know how can I help you guys. If you feel like إنكم you don't understand it, we can change ممكن نغير طريقة الشرح. ممكن إذا أنتم حابين نعمل كلاسات إضافية نعمل ريفيو. الدرجات الافرج كلها حقيقة الافرج اليور جروب وأوفر أول افرج مرة تزعل. يعني الأوفر أول 2.4 I believe, something like this. So ما أعرف صراحة. يعني time this is I cannot handle it. بس if
يا أستاذة صوتك راح.
دكتورة
تفضل.
أنا الكوز الثاني يوم دخلت علق الموقع وما دخلني إلا كان معي 9 دقائق.
أنا شوف بعض المشاكل يعني بالكويز الأول مس ملك راحت إن الأغلبية كان في مشكلة بالLMS وأعطتكم 5 على الكويز. بس بالثانية ما دام إن قليل عدد الطلاب اللي صارتهم مشاكل بالعادة they don't consider it unfortunately. أنا في طلاب عندي حتى بالمادة الثانية اقتراحي لكم. طبعا أنا أعتقد أنه ممكن تكون مشكلة بالواي فاي عندكم سرعته. الشيء الثاني جربوا براوزر مختلفة. يعني إذا أنت تستخدم براوزر
مو معقول يعني في 5 أو 6 تقريبا يعني صارت لهم نفس المشكلة حقتي نفس الشعبة.
هي هذا المسألة، هم يحسبوها إذا 5 6 وأنتوا عدد الطلاب بالشعبة 100 they will not consider it.
يعني الحمد لله لحقت أحل، بس يعني خلص علي الوقت وأنا أحل وجبت درجة زينة الحمد لله، بس ما ودي إن تصادفني يعني مشاكل زي كذا بالمستقبل.
طيب أنا نصيحتي يعني الشيء اللي أقدر أعمله، يعني أنا ما عندي كنترول على البيريود أوف تايم، بس حاولوا إنك تكونوا في مكان يكون الإنترنت فيه عالي. الشيء الثاني حاولوا تنزلوا أكثر من براوزر بجهازكم. اسألوا زملائكم، أنتم عندكم جروب، اسألوا زملائكم اللي ما واجهوا مشكلة إيش مثلا البراوزر اللي جالسين يستخدمونه. خلي معاك إذا تقدر أكثر من جهاز على أساس لو صارتك مشكلة ادخل من جهاز ثاني. أنا عارفة إن هذا كله راح يضيع الوقت وأنت يعني هو الوقت قصير، بس يعني هذا اللي أقدر أقول لكم هو بالنسبة للاختبار.
إن شاء الله ما
السلام
نصادف
عليكم.
مشاكل.
معلش يا تيتشر، بس أتوقع المشكلة ما كانت في الإنترنت أو السرعة. هو في بداية الاختبار أو الكويز كان في زحمة مرة في الدخول على الكويز، فهنا صار السيرفر داون. الوقت هذا هم اللي تعثروا الناس، فأنا أقول لا تدخلون في البداية، تأخروا شوي، شوف إذا ضبط الوضع ادخل. هذا اللي سويته أنا، يعني لا إجراء أو شيء.
أنا دكتورة دخلت بعد 4 دقائق، يعني 2 و4 دقائق وبرضو علق. ما يعني هو ضغط نص ساعة
عليكم.
كل الشعب ضغط مرة.
دكتورة
أنا من ناحيتي اللي أقدر أعمله راح أرجع أتواصل مرة ثانية مع مس ملك، راح أرفع لها إيميل وأطلب منها إن هي تزيد وقت just in case إن هي صارت فيها مشكلة، إن ما يكون الوقت عندكم قصير. يعني هذا اللي أقدر أعمله من جهتي يعني. أيوة، اللي حابب يطلع يقدر يطلع، أخذت الحضور أوريدي.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
ايوه، بخصوص الكويز يا دكتورة، الكويز كان يعني انا دخلت تقريبا و يعني 2 و13 دقيقة شيء زي كذا، تمام.
طيب.
ودخلت يوم دخلت الكويز يعني دخلت علق معايا، يعني انا دخلت بعد ما نزل الاختبار ب 13 دقيقة ولسه معلق كمان. ويعني دخلت وهو المتاح الوقت لي 15 دقيقة، أنا دخلت ناكلت